C is this C. C is this C C is C is this C C is this C.
Okay. Here. Okay, we're gonna check. Yep. All right. I hope you can hear me. Yeah. So, thanks for joining our segment today. On behalf of British Stiftung, Shakti Foundation, and the Climate Action Network Southeast Asia, I would like to welcome you to today's segment on the Just Energy Transition Partnership. We're happy you made it into this room. I know that we are competing with a lot of other interesting segments today, including the arrival of Nula, so it might be a bit noisy. Um, so in this side event, we would like to shed some light on the idea of just energy transition partnership. Um, the first just energy transition partnership was signed at COP26 last year with South Africa. And after that, there's been a lot of talks with other countries such as India, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Senegal. And today we would like to discuss in particular civil society and trade union perspectives in these partnerships because we believe that their participation and their consultation is vital for these just energy transition partnerships to be truly just and inclusive for the respective countries. So in order to do that, we have a fantastic range of speakers that I would like to introduce to you before we start. Um, First, we're very happy that Secretary of State Jochen Plessberg from the German Ministry of Development Cooperation is here to join us. We're happy that you made some time out of your busy schedule to be here with us. Thank you. And we have Boitumelo Muleta. She's a social development policy coordinator for the Congress of South African Trade Unions and has been involved in some of the discussions around the JETP in South Africa. Also from South Africa, we have Gabriel Klassen with the Climate Action Network South Africa. And then we have from India, Anshu Bharadwaj. He is the CEO of Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation. From Vietnam, we have my colleague here, the director of our climate and energy project in Asia, based in Hanoi, Julia Behrens. And last but not least, for Southeast Asia and the Indonesian case in particular, we have Nitina Saidura with us. He is the director and regional coordinator of the Climate Action Network Southeast Asia. So without further ado, I want to take a little bit of a step back, instead of talking about the just energy transition partnerships right away. I would like to ask the panelists, what is it that you think is really needed in your countries to achieve a just energy transition? What are the challenges and maybe also the priorities you think? And what would be, in the current case, meant by just from your perspective? And then following on that, how do you perceive the discussion on the just energy transition partnerships in that context? So we'll start with South Africa because we do have a lot of updates also from last week, and this is also the case where the JETP has already been concluded and we have the most information. So for Boitumelo, we have the floor.
Thank you, colleagues. So, just energy transition basically aims to make the process to shifting from a low carbon economy to a just and climate resilient economy. I think the justice part focuses on ensuring that workers and communities are going to be displaced are sufficiently protected. Just transition is needed to prevent or reduce these negative impacts that we would have faced through climate change. It's going to be essential that the just transition embeds human and labor rights with principles of justice to the energy transition outlined. The just transition cannot be achieved without a government-led plan for a just energy transition, where there is meaningful social dialogue, where there is sufficient planning for workers, where there's prioritizing of sector-specific sectors, and there are pathways that are given to sectors in the transition. What is most important for labor is basically skilling, upskilling, and reskilling, and ensuring that there's sufficient social protection and safety nets for workers that are going to be displaced. Um, in South Africa, we have a presidential climate change commission. That's a very important social dialogue entity that we have in where there's social dialogue between government, business, organized labor, and civil society. The principle of a just transition are clearly defined by the framework that the PCC has developed. The principles include underpinning a just transition towards a low carbon and climate resilient economy by defining how we can achieve this through distributive justice, restorative justice, and procedural justice. The definition of justice in the just energy transition is it's easily appropriated by various constituencies, and it's going to be important for us to ensure that when we speak about justice, we involve the high issue of human and labor rights. We involve the high, mostly principles that actually are going to be important: inequality, inclusivity, and ensuring that no one is left behind. It's also going to be important that we look at South Africa not only as the first country to receive just energy transition partnership, but also as an example to see how it is we can learn from the shortcomings that have come with this just energy transition partnership. What has come about, especially with one, is that we realize that once the Just Energy Transition Investment Plan was presented to South Africans, especially organized labor, it was brought at a very end state. We were not given the opportunity to actually reflect and advise on what we felt that the Just Energy partnership should be like. Therefore, it's going to be important that other states, like one had noted, that are going to be in line to receive this type of funding, are very influential and are listened to when it comes to the planning of the just energy transition, because when we lack the elements and the voice and perspective of workers and communities, it's going to be easy for these just energy transition partnerships to be a business model that will not benefit the people or not benefit workers in their entirety through the just transition. So we therefore believe that that's the main principle of being able to achieve and sustain these partnerships, ensuring inclusivity, equality, as well as the voices of workers and communities.
Thanks so much, Kwetumelo, for making these very important points. I think that the fact that really involving the communities is key. I think that is really something where a lot of expertise from trade unions and civil society will come in. And following up on that, Gabriel, you're also from South Africa and you have been following the discussions. How do you see the involvement of civil society in particular in the JETP in South Africa at this stage? Thank you.
I think firstly, on the nose with most of what I wanted to say, and so it's quite smart that a lot of it aligns quite strongly. I think I'll start with what Executive Director of Can International said, Jasmine Misko. She said something to the lines of, this is not necessarily a just energy transition, but rather an energy transition plan or partnership, because much of the, for many rather, of these stakeholders that need to be in the decision-making spaces have not been as deeply and meaningfully incorporated as they could be. I believe there's a level of incorporation, of course, as Butinga mentioned, the PCC Regional Climate Commission facilitated some of the consultative spaces, which was quite constructive. But looking at the plan ahead of us, I do see elements that allude to lack of meaningful participation. I think a massive part of this is that unions, youth communities are not necessarily in the space. And I mentioned the three because we can't pretend as though there's not different mandates that we all serve in our context. Obviously, they align quite similarly oftentimes because unions fight for communities um, and youth who are trying to access certain spaces that we oftentimes are left out of. And so I think a massive aspect when it comes to a just transition or just energy transition specifically is this element of justice needing to be deeply and highly emphasized, justice being equitable, justice being fair. I think people hear just and they think, oh, it's just an energy transition. Clearly that must be the case because otherwise we wouldn't be having a panel discussion about our experiences and deep exchanges on it. And so I really think that that's a massive aspect. I think um, when it comes to our experience in civil society, just coming from a CAN South Africa perspective, it's just that there's been a massive lack of transparency and a mass aspect of secrecy in the build-up to the release of the plan. I think we've been given half-baked things and then told, cool, you've made the cake, when we just put it back in the oven after checking it for 5 minutes. And I don't think that's necessarily adequate enough to call it a consultative and co-created and co-designed plan. Massive aspect is that, nothing but to touch this, is that the term justice or just transition has been massively co-opted. It's not necessarily reflective of what trade unions had brought forward when it was initially birthed. Because if it was, I think we wouldn't have so many issues in the implementation of it or the adoption of it rather. And then when it comes to other challenges that we're experiencing, I mean, obviously this is the role of civil society, NGOs and other individuals in the space. Myself working with a lot of young people and community members is the dissemination of information and engaging consultative spaces. But even those spaces are very distant from us, that we have to go and consult people who understand it more than us to break it down for other people, for them to break it down for people. And somewhere along the line, we lose the meaning of what's actually going on inside those decision-making spaces. And so I think knowledge and accessibility is a mass aspect of this partnership or of a just transition that is sorely missing. And then of course, capacity building, not only to engage these documents, but to be well equipped to implement them, or the action aspects of it. I think that's where we sorely are struggling to find common ground on in South Africa right now. If you were to ask a lot of people in the PCC, there would be a bit of mixed emotions right now about how this partnership looks. I think some would say that it's a direct, copy of what they've been doing, and some might say, maybe more might say, that it's actually not necessarily something that they've done at all, and that it's actually lost its meaning along the way somewhere. I mean, obviously they facilitated the framework in which we put forward the plan, of course, but I think the framework is just as important in the kind of moving forward with it. I mean, the PCC is just an advisory body at the end of the day, and while that stands that way, I think they do hold quite a weight when it comes to pushing our leaders into a space where it can be a bit of a, hey, how about you do it this way, how about you do it that way? And so I think a massive part of where we as civil society land on is there's a win and lose situation right now where we find ourselves wanting to engage this space a lot more, but that the hurdles are sometimes a bit too ridiculous to jump over, that going around it takes time, time that we don't have because unfortunately implementation is being rushed, or adoption of this partnership is, so that's kind of how it looks at just transition right now in our perspective.
Thank you so much, Gabriel, and I think it's particularly interesting that you pointed out that yes, it is about inclusion, but it's also about knowledge, because how can you be included in something that, maybe you don't know about it, but there's a lack of transparency with regard to what is actually being discussed. Now moving on from South Africa, where we already have an agreement, we are moving to India, another country where we know discussions are underway to conclude a just energy transition partnership. So Anshu, from your perspective, what would a just energy transition look like in India? What are the main challenges and priorities? And what do you think, what is your assessment of the current discussions regarding the JET piece?
Hello. Thank you very much. I'll just get some perspectives from India on the state of play in India on the transition aspects. So, typically when we want to talk about this transition, the talk is about coal. I would urge to think of, if you mentally think of sort of a 2 by 2 matrix. On one side you have various fuels, on the other side you have time frame. Right, so we have on the fuel side we have coal, oil, gas. On the time frame, if you think of short term, 10 to 15 years, and long term, 15 years and beyond. Now in India we don't have much gas, so it's all about coal and oil. So let's think of coal, oil, short term, long term. And I'll give you a quick analysis of the state of play in India with respect to these two fossil fuels. Now, as far as oil goes, a transition is currently already underway. Uh, the good news is that most of two-wheeler and three-wheeler vehicles are already electric in nature in the two-wheeler and three-wheeler segments, which are you can see running all over in these metros and urban areas. In the four-wheeler segment, it is just about beginning. Buses, it is just about beginning. In the freight segment, there is talk happening, but as of now, no action. But there is some talk happening. We are not sure whether it will be electric vehicles or whether it will be hydrogen fuel cells. We are not sure about that. But there is some policy action happening on the ground. The sector employs about 30 million people, transportation sector, including all the ancillary supply industries. As of now, in the two-wheeler, three-wheeler segment, the current industries have sort of are gradually adapting. The real challenge will come when they start manufacturing the entire supply chain. So right now, we are importing batteries, we are importing the power electronics. The challenge will come when we start manufacturing everything. The other issue is that in transportation sector, mostly it is organized, and there is a relatively small unorganized sector. It's largely organized. Now, coming to coal, coal is a more difficult sector in India as of now. The entire sector employs about 15 million people, including formal and informal, direct, indirect jobs all put together. Uh, as of now, I don't see a transition happening in the coal sector, and I'll explain why. The electric power demand in India is continuously increasing every year for three main reasons. One is economic growth, which leads to more power demand. Number two, as other sectors decarbonize, in particular transportation and industry, that gets added to electric power set demand. And number three, as we saw this year, when there are seasonal heat waves, there is a spike in the power demand. And this year we saw it in April, May, there was a massive spike in power demand because of air conditioning, because of heat waves. And we had to resort to more coal to meet the loads. So power demand is continuously increasing. The rate at which we are adding capacity, about 10 to 15 gigawatts per annum, is just about keeping pace with the increasing power demand. So we are adding renewables at the rate of 10-15 gigawatts per annum. What we need to be doing is triple of that to meet the target of 500 gigawatts which we have set for ourselves in 2030. We need to be doing 3 times that, but we are doing it about 10-15 gigawatts per annum. Given that, if by 2030, if we are able to get 500 gigawatts with storage on ground, we might see a move away from coal in middle of 2030s. That's what most modeling studies which have been done in India suggest, that a conscious move away from coal will happen only after a decade or so, once we are sure of the technical and engineering aspects of grid stability with RE plus storage. Right now, there are some mines which are currently undergoing closure, but that's because those mines are not economically viable and not because of any conscious move away from coal. It's because those mining has become economically unviable in those areas. But a conscious move away from coal will only happen maybe 10 years from now. So that's the current state of play in India. I just want to thank some of our partners who, and what I'm speaking is based on the work done by our partners, in particular iForest, I see Shrestha is here, Vaibhav is here from CEW, Deepti is here from WRI, so just acknowledging the work. Thank you.
So a lot of challenges in the coal sector in India that needs to be tackled for a just energy transition. Thank you, Anshu. Now moving on from South Asia to Southeast Asia, and with me is my colleague Yuria Behrens from Vietnam, and we know that there are also ongoing discussions with regards to a potential just energy transition partnership in Vietnam, and I know that things are not that easy. So, Julia, first of all, what is the situation like on the ground? Like, what is really needed for just energy transition in Vietnam, and how do you perceive the current discussions in that regard, in particular with regard to the justice element of the just transition? Thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne, and also thank you to all the other speakers for their fascinating insights so far. So, as Yvonne mentioned, there are discussions going on the JETP in Vietnam, but they aren't going according to the initial timeline. There were also expectations the JETP might be announced during this COP or G20 together with Indonesia. This is not the case, and it has various reasons. There are three main reasons, however. The first one is that there are 5 billion on the table at the moment for the JETP in Vietnam. Or I don't know at the moment, but that's the last information at least I have. Maybe you can correct me. And that the Vietnamese government was not happy about this number at all, because if you look at South Africa, 8.5 billion, Indonesia now 20 billion, I think was the number that was announced. So the Vietnamese government feels a bit neglected in comparison to that. Then there's of course the nature of the money, so a high number of loans and not grants in this JETP. And then finally there is the problematic situation of civil society and participation possibilities, opportunities in Vietnam. This year has been not a good year for Vietnamese civil society. It all started with the arrest of one of the most prominent figures of civil society in the energy sector, Nguyen Thi Khanh, who is in prison now for so-called tax evasion or tax issues. And since then, the situation hasn't gotten much better. So there are still a few NGOs, local NGOs, who are able to speak to the government, but only within a certain framework and within certain lines that are set by the government. And this hinders a real participatory process of diverse critical voices in the JETP. Also, when we look at trade unions in Vietnam, they are state affiliated, like there's official trade unions, and only recently it has been allowed to establish independent worker organizations, which have not the same legal status as trade unions, and the implementation is lacking. So when we look, what does that all mean for a just energy transition partnership? I think it means that in Vietnam we can only have an energy transition partnership in the current context, and that the just aspect is really in danger of being watered down so far that it's not worth the name anymore, and that it can be actually counterproductive to call it a just energy transition partnership, because it's only, in Vietnam, it's going to only include the justice aspect of access to energy, which can be just, but not the participation aspect. Apart from that, the strong stakeholders in the JETP are the different ministries, the state-owned companies,
which are also all not aligned in their opinion, so that also doesn't help the negotiations, that the Vietnamese government currently also doesn't agree internally of what they want and where they want to go. So I can't even imagine it must be difficult for the outside governments to understand what the negotiation partners in Vietnam actually want.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it seems that the prospects are not very positive in that case. But I think that's also worth noting and worth pointing out in the current discussions. Now we're staying in South Asia, but we're moving to another Southeast Asian country that is currently under discussion for a potential JP, and I think this is really one of the cases where we did see some developments here at COP27 in the last few days, also connected to the G20 summit in Indonesia, so that is Indonesia. So Niti, what is your perspective on that? Regarding both the challenges of the energy and of the energy sector and the transition, and the current discussions that are ongoing.
Yes, certainly thank you, Yvonne. Certainly the announcement of the Just Energy Transition Partnership in Indonesia to the value of 20 billion US dollars has gained a lot of attention and interest here. Before I get into that, I just like to also talk of what we what Climate Action Network and Climate Action Network Southeast Asia understand as broad principles of just energy transition. And of course, as mentioned by previous speakers, justice has to be the central element, economy-wide justice and society-wide justice. That's procedural justice, distributive justice, restorative justice. So I think that's the core underlying feature. The second thing is there has to be buy-in at the highest level of governments, at the federal, state, and local levels. They have to be part of the process. Then the third point is that there has to be inclusive and meaningful stakeholder engagement, especially at society, at community level, that involves getting the voices of women, youth, indigenous peoples, in particular faith groups, and in particular the marginalized, vulnerable communities who don't have the power to actually get their views as well. And the fourth point is the creation of the institutional framework to continue with the consultative and engagement processes once the initial part of the project is launched. So all these sound very good, yet they need to be tested, and we need to create concrete examples of how this can be best done. So I think our South African colleagues have had the opportunity to see how this is taking place in practice, and we also we can learn from their example. And Indonesia, I mean, while it's known for the Jet B, there's also something else very exciting happening, which is this innovative regions for a just energy transition project, which is being funded by the German government agency IKI, coordinated by GIZ with the participation of the International Labour Organization, International Trade Union Confederation, and Climate Action Network together with Wuppertal Institute. And we are doing a 4-year project to implement just energy transition in an active coal mining region in East Kalimantan, Indonesia. So this is one of the most active coal mining areas, and it's we are set to start anytime, probably in the at the beginning of the new year, and it's very exciting because CAN has the opportunity to work with the stakeholders, the tripartite plus. ILO will take care of government and employers, ITUC will take care of the workers, and CAN will look into the stakeholder engagement, which includes consulting them and getting their own vision. We want a transformation to happen, get their own vision as to what they think a just transition is like, and also come up with alternative livelihood scenarios as they transition away from the dependence on the coal mining infrastructure. They may be retailers, they may be caterers, they may be, not directly employed yet dependent, what their view of alternative livelihoods is like. So that's a very exciting opportunity. We are going to do that over the next 4 years, and it will be the ability to create the solid, concrete, real-life examples from the ground on how just transition can be implemented and the challenges which come from it. Now I'll briefly touch on the Just Energy Transition Partnership of Indonesia, funded by the United States and Japan to the value of $20 billion with public and private finance, details of which haven't been announced, apart from the fact that 1/3 of 10 billion will come from multilateral development banks. That's what we know. So we don't know the real mix of the finance. And it's very ambitious, it's to to move away, to make Indonesia. Oh, to make Indonesia move away from coal, which includes shutting coal power plants, bringing forward the sector's peak emissions date by 7 years to 2030, the single largest climate finance transaction ever. So I won't go through all the technical details and the amount of megawatts and gigawatts. But the thing is, in retiring a 660 megawatt coal-fired power plant, there's no mention of justice. There's no mention of the just, as in the justice in this whole announcement. That's very concerning. Like where the justice, where the focus in justice is, where it should be. How should the money be spent to get the best deal for climate and local people? Is the quantum enough? So in a way, for those of us who are quite, actively involved in monitoring what's happening in Indonesia together with our members in Indonesia, we remain a little skeptical. In fact, I describe this as, an exercise in creative writing and wishful thinking, because it's sort of fancy words. My colleagues in Indonesia were a bit more blunt. They said just a gimmick. So we have to see how it's going to roll out. And just as watch this space, what I'd like to also mention is, since we have Mr. Flossbach from Germany here, it's being financed by Japan and US. When we work on transitioning, persuading our governments to transition away from fossil fuels to renewable energy, it doesn't help when countries like Germany, for instance, postpone their coal phase-out date. When the UK, issues licenses to extract oil in the North Sea right after the landmark COP26. When private financial institutions in the US, after signing a pledge not to finance fossil fuels, do exactly the same thing in Southeast Asia. This makes our work very hard, because we are told our countries, especially those fossil fuel exporting nations, the revenue we get from fossil fuels as a percentage of the economy is much higher than Germany, it's much higher than UK, it's much higher than US. If they don't want to phase out, why should we?
Thanks a lot, Niti, for these very important points. I think we've heard a lot of interesting insight, also a lot of criticism with regard to the ongoing discussions. So I would like to ask Secretary of State Jochen Plassweit from Germany to the States, and maybe give us a few comments on what he has heard. Mr. Plassweit, you're welcome. Please come and join us. And the good news is we have some more time. The bad news is it seems that our second speaker from the UK COP26 envoy, John Merton, is not here yet. So I think we'll have a little bit more time to talk about the jet piece from the German perspective. Mr. Fleischler, you have the floor.
Thanks to all of you for your input. Also a bit of food for controversial discussions. I will come back to what you said.
My dear friend, first of all, I start with South Africa because that was where all this, the whole idea was born in the run-up to Glasgow. And I want to say some, well, first assessments. Wouldn't say that everything is perfect, maybe even not good, but there are very positive elements in it. And after we launched it in Glasgow, we knew that we were at the very beginning. Nothing was set in place in South Africa. It was just an idea, and the commitment of South Africa to go the way also to phase out coal and at the end to reach carbon neutrality. And the commitment of so-called donors to put $8.5 billion on the table as an initial support scheme for this transition. And that it should be just, and that has been mentioned by many of you, and that is not what it is all about, but what it is also about. And let me start that one of the good things with the JETP in South Africa was that it was created in a way that I did not experience in quite a long time of working on these issues, and that was that we had a very close collaboration between the G7 and donor institutions, and from the very beginning in collaboration with South Africa. If you want to see something on equal footing, then this was an example for that. The collaboration on the donor side, by the way, was something that concerned the Indian government. I discussed it with them many times. They prefer to have something with Germany, with France, with the US, and they were a little bit of suspicious whether they are confronted with a fully negotiated bloc on one side. And I traveled exactly for that purpose at the end of April to New Delhi to explain, no, our way to do this just energy transition partnerships is that they are host country driven. They are sitting in the driver's seat with all the opportunities, but also with all the limits. And we spoke about some of the limits. If we once we decide that it is host country driven, and you are partnering with let's say Pune and Paris, then you have to accept some of the social and societal realities in those countries. So back to South Africa, it was not forgiven that after the announcement we would also deliver on the next concrete steps. And of course, you're much better in it because it's your country and your society. But what we saw is that, of course, this is something for national internal tensions. You are moving away from one system of energy supply and demand to another one, and of course, this causes questions. Concerns, people are worrying about their jobs and their future and maybe the future of their kids. And I think in South Africa it's doable. We have a situation where the current coal-based energy system is far away from being a business case. Economically, it's a burden. And so there is an advantage to move into something new. And that is where we are now. We have the investment plan. For us, it was not clear that it would go through the cabinet. This is the basis now to adjust all the systems. And as our dear colleagues rightly said, now it's of utmost important that we deliver on the just part, because that is a challenge in South Africa. It's not the techniques. We know the technologies, we know how to run solar parks and wind parks, and we know how the future grid should look like. This is all doable. I think also the economics, the business case is there, but do we really deliver on the social aspects? And there is a lot of risks, but also opportunities in the details. Just one example, if you let the energy system design just to the engineers, no? Then you get an energy optimum, but a social disaster. Because you will build the new energy regions will sit somewhere else than the energy regions at the moment. If you move the optimum to where the energy production is sitting now, you lose maybe some percent dots of efficiency in the whole system, but you gain a lot of social potential to solve the whole issue. Just to give one example. Now, moving from there to, or just one sentence to that. We feel very responsible for what we kicked off to be a partner not only for 1, 2, 3 years, but for a long time. And that is why we appointed at the Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, especially in Boy, for the ZP. It's my former boss, a later colleague, Rainer Barker. He was State Secretary in the Ministry for Environment. Later on, I was fighting a bit with him on energy, and now he is as a freelancer and one of the best experts and politicians we have in our country doing this involved job. And another one will come into play. We have just appointed the former trade union DGB boss Rainer Hoffmann as a special envoy for Germany, for BMZ, for decent work, and he will liaise with Rainer Barker and will also help in the discussion the experiences we had in Germany with our coal phase out planning and share these experiences with the South African trade unions and the society overall. Now to India. We decided together with our Indian colleagues that we both sides will not push it here to solve it by the end of this COP. We understood they need more time, and there is a completely different game in India, as you rightly pointed out. In India, coal is a business case. And it's also what I didn't know, but what I learned, subsidizing other parts of the economy, for example, in the transport sector. So it's, and you have also, but in this case, similar to South Africa, you have a shortage in electricity and a fast-growing economy. So makes everything a bit more complicated. The reluctance I found in my discussions were less as I experienced it in society. It's a debate inside the government, and they have to clarify some of the issues, and we are partnering, but it's now on their side to clarify and get a position that we can negotiate with them. Moving from there to Vietnam. I want to point on what has been said. Is it inclusive, and all these things? No, it is not. I said it in Hanoi when I was there a couple of weeks ago, and I say it in public. In some countries we are speaking about thinking spaces, by the way, also in India, for NGOs and civil society. In Vietnam, I saw lost spaces. And I had a meeting with NGOs in a safe place in the German embassy, but still they were so afraid. And that's a clear indication for a closed society where you cannot get access to public decision-making processes. And I cannot change the logic of the Vietnamese system with a jet plane. it's too much. But what we can do is to address the issue and to make it a point. I still believe there is a potential for, let's call it an energy transition partnership with Vietnam. We are discussing with them about the remaining amount of coal in 2030 and all these things. But I'm on that side, I'm quite confident that we can come to an agreement. On the involvement of public and civil society, I don't have this hope at the moment. It's a bigger debate in this country. And now to Indonesia. I have to be frank, there were a lot of wrong points in your statement, to make it a bit lively. Um, Number one is this is not paid by Japan and the US. It's an inclusive G7 plus partnership. But what we arranged, and I'm a little bit proud on that, is in a call already in early March. I invited our G7 partners that we should stop traveling all one after another to our host partners, knocking at their doors, maybe also not consistently in the concepts, but that we, for each and every G have two partners, two G7 partners in the lead. That is for India, the US, John Kerry, and Germany, me. For Vietnam, it's the EU and UK. For Senegal, it's France and Germany. And for Indonesia, it's US and Japan. But we are all behind it. We are constantly clearing our position on the partner side. And now we got a deal. And that consists of 10 billion coming from the donor countries, the public sector. By the way, not the biggest part from those you mentioned. Some others are in as well. And another 10 billion to be assumed from the private sector, philanthropies, but also the private sector itself. It's an assumption. It's mentioned in the text, but of course, governments cannot commit for the private sector. But I think it's a very valid assumption, and the better the regulation in Indonesia will look like, the more consistency they get in the rule-based framing of the energy transition. The more we can overcome the issue of local content, which is certainly an obstacle on that, and we are very much behind the concept to, of course, via the Just Energy Transition Partnerships, push the local economies. But if you make it an issue, then we do have WTO problems, and then the money will not fly from neither from us nor from the private sector. So. The point, and thanks for mentioning it, because it gives me the chance to clarify it. We did not postpone our coal phase out in Germany. I was responsible in the last government, and I was suffering that with our former partner in government, we could not get an earlier phase out of coal. We agreed on 2035 to 2038. Now the new government is committed to 2030. And this remains. We will do it consistently with Powering Past Coal Coalition. The only thing is that for this year and maybe the next year, we will use a bit more coal than it was planned in the scenario to phase down and finally phase out coal. And that is simply, we dislike it. It's full of pain for us, because we were fighting for something different. But with the war of Russia against Ukraine, we were in a really difficult situation. I think nobody in the value-based world wants us to buy any longer gas from Putin in the value-based world. So if we don't do it, we have to find other ways in the interim phase, and that is where we are sitting. But it's not easy for us, and as I said, quite painful.
Thank you so much, Mr. Plattsburgh, for these insights. I think think it's also good that we have this conversation so that we can clarify certain points that might not be clear because, like we said at the beginning, there's also, it seems there's not that much information out there yet on these GAPs, other than a few newspaper articles. So it's good to have that conversation. And I also particularly like that you pointed out that this is not just, the JEPs don't just help us to improve the situation in the countries where the money is going, but they might also help us to coordinate better as developed countries, as donors to those countries, and make sure that we align our efforts to achieve the best outcomes. I think that's a really good point as well. We have a second round, and I think all of you listened to Mr. Flaskat's statements and probably have a few comments or additional points that you would like to raise in reaction to that. So I want to give you the opportunity to do that. And I know a lot of the points that you have raised earlier regarding the criticism, they already imply certain political recommendations. But in the second round, I would very much like to focus on, from your perspective, like Christmas is not here yet, but if you had a wish, like regarding the implementation of the JET-P in your country, what would that wish be? Like, how should this JET-P, from your perspective, ideally look like? So this is my question for you, and I'm not sure who would like to start. Maybe we'll start with South Africa again.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lasbach. That was good reflections on South Africa. But thank you for the clarification with the Indonesia experience. It was quite helpful. I think the most emphasis on social dialogue and that it should be meaningful is quite important in this discussion. It's come across as very important in that there has been so much inadequate information that's filtered down to us that we are left to then scurry down into the media and grab what we can so that we can have some meaning to what this JETS partnerships mean to us. I think when it comes to the South African experience, we look at how this JET-P is being proposed to us. We're being told that there's 81% of loans that will be given to us and 4% of grants, and it's going to be very difficult as a trade union to go down to workers and say, this is a number, this is the percentage of loans that are being given to our country, and this is what they're committing themselves to. With the large debt to GDP that South Africa has, it's going to be problematic for workers who want to actually endorse this JET partnership. I think also when we look at how the JET IP, which is the investment plan in South Africa, endorsed by cabinet, there's very minimal engagement with civil society and organized labor. I think it should be noted that there was a very close task team that was appointed by the President of South Africa, where organized labor was very much not represented. So what happened in that task team was that we were told that the members of the task team signed non-disclosure agreements that they couldn't filter down any information as to what was being discussed in the nature of the investment plan. So, Ivan, coming to you, I think if I had a wish list, honestly, I would want to see less loans and more grants when it comes to the JET-IP. This is to ensure that we're not further indebted, especially as South Africa. I think the just energy transition in its entirety should be able to address energy poverty in South Africa, which is something that is very, very much dominant, especially noting that we're going through phases of load shedding that are at this stage unable to be resolved. The most important part as well is to ensure that our power utility ESCOM is not hollowed out of the system through the implementation of a just energy transition. We would not want to see ESCOM being privatized by the rollout of IPP, which is going to be very difficult for our members that are working at ESCOM. I think the other part is that there should be sufficient investment in skills. The JSIP speaks of a 0.1% that's allocated to skills, and it's going to be a bit difficult to be able to ensure that workers are not left behind in the just energy transition. So sufficient investment in training, reskilling, skilling and upskilling is going to be important. Um, the manufacturing sector is going to be a key sector in the implementation of just transition. So we feel that there should be sufficient investment in sectors that are going to be key in the implementation of the just energy transition. Manufacturing through localization is very important, as well as the agriculture sector, which is going to include land reform and land distribution, which can be seen when mind the rehabilitating communities and workers are able to participate in that sector. The GSIP speaks of the transport sector as being one of the focus areas, and we believe that the focus of the GSIP is quite misplaced in that it speaks of the rolling out and investment in electric vehicles. South Africa has a huge issue with regards to public transport, so it's going to be important that the investment plan, and we're hoping that we'll get an opportunity to be consulted and further speak to this. The investment plan should speak to how we are going to improve in road infrastructure, as well as how we are going to invest and improve public transport. Ownership for workers and communities is going to be important in being key players in the rollout of renewable energy. I think workers will have the particular keenness to be part of this new low carbon economy, and therefore they should be sufficiently incorporated into it. Just basically the most basic thing is meaningful consultation and the opportunity to advise the states on the JITSP and the JIT implementation. Organized labor has gone through various means in which we were trying to allocate and see how we could create pathways for our workforce. We have what we call a COSATU blueprint for workers, which speaks to three main sectors that we profile: the coal mining sector, the transport sector, as well as the agriculture sector. These are sectors that we found quite important, and we believe that through sufficient engagement, we can be able to find consensus on how we can implement the just transition and give pathways to workers that workers themselves have spoken to. I think the one thing that we can neglect, we are so quick to neglect, is that workers themselves on the plant, in the ground, in the workplace, they have ideas because they are part of the economy, they are part of the sectors, and they are the ones that are going to be able to give us the innovative ideas into how we actually implement the just transition. So in its entirety, we keep cautioning, especially our governments, with regards to getting into more indebtedness when it comes to the GSIP. That is not going to be helpful for the development of our state, and we'd like to be part of these discussions so we can caution governments and also guide governments from a labor perspective.
Thanks, Bartomelo. And I think knowing that South Africa is one of the few cases where we actually have a really good representation for organized labor, and where we see social dialogue working and functioning, I think it's all the more important to make sure that that type of social dialogue also receives a prominent place in this just energy transition partnership. Gabriel, is there anything you would like to add from a civil society perspective? And we only have about 13 minutes left, so please keep your statements short and sweet.
Well, I think Bartomelo covered most of what I was going to say, which is perfect. I think just highlighting once again, South Africa cannot afford to pay back the amount of debt that will be incurred from the loans. You can say we can in some magical world, you mentioned Christmas, but unfortunately Santa Claus isn't real, and so the harsh realities lay on the people at the end of the day. I think just highlighting the fact that I think meaningful participation is something that's deeply and sorely missing right now in the context of civil society. When there's a youth consultation or consultation with young people and communities, oftentimes I'll be the one to know about it because of the networks that I'm positioned in, not only with CAN South Africa, but the various youth networks and movements I'm a part of. And I think it's hilarious that if that's what they called participatory consultations, I wonder if they've ever been to a lecture hall, because that's what it was. And so it's quite hilarious if that's what they called it in the time, and we didn't know it was consultations, if that's the case. And so I definitely think that there needs to be a big emphasis in deeper and more meaningful participation. In a magical world, I would have hoped that communities and young people and those in the NGO space would be able to be a part of the decision-making space, not only advising. I think because the harsh realities lay upon us, at the end of the day, workers go home, they're part of the community, and that's what I think Botemela talks so often about, workers and communities as a unit in some form. We talk about organized labor, but there's an entire aspect of labor that isn't organized, or community that isn't organized because they do not have employment. And young people play a massive role in that, it's 40% unemployed. And so I definitely think that just actionables basically is that, I think Mr. Plaspark said that justice is an aspect of it, but I think the name of this is what's in the name. I think justice is crucial into the center of it, not just an aspect to it. If justice is to be an aspect of it, just remove the word just and make it an energy transition partnership or financing partnership. I don't think right now, as it stands, or in the trajectory it's going, that it's deserving of the name. And I think going forward, as others adopt it, we've heard that justice isn't in space. So how can we claim it as justice? It's not lie and try to sully it down to, oh, it's this, because it's just further greenwashing, if we're going to be honest about it. It's lying to not only the public but to ourselves who actually know the truth. And so I think, just honestly speaking, make it energy transition financing partnership and move on with today. And we can acknowledge it for what it is. Otherwise, if you care for justice to be a part of it deeply, actually look at incorporating what's needed in the space. And we'd be happy to deeply participate in those engagements. Not just in a cool, done, tick, move on, but deep conversations like you have in the end of the desk over there, and further from there, where we stand to be corrected and to learn more. Because unfortunately, because of lack of transparency, we are only able to make decisions based on what we are privy to understand and to know. And so I think just highlighting, once again, there's a need and a deep need, and I would mention this as a thing to go forward, is a deep need for meaningful and active public participation. I think that would be my highlight, is meaningful public and active participation for the implementation of this plan to be something that is co-designed, or at least this pathway is co-designed, for transparency and accountability to be something that's deeply at the root of the way that we move forward. I think South Africa has a magic way of making money disappear, and so if we don't act appropriately and keep those who are managing our future, if we're going to be honest, at the hands of it, I think we'll end up being lost more than we are found. And then just a small comment, I think you mentioned, Mr. Plaspark, that it hurts Global North oftentimes, or maybe I wouldn't speak for this, the Germany, to continue investment, but while you may be hurt, I speak from the community-based organizations and the youth that we're part of, the hurt that you feel is the death of us. And so continued investment in fossil fuels doesn't just hurt us emotionally, it kills us. And so, yeah, it's time for a just energy transition. It's a phase-out approach, of course, but I think, weapons formed against you in the form of an energy war or an energy weapon because of the war happening should not be, an excuse to hit weapons towards us in the global south. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gabriel, for these very powerful words, very critical and very important. We will move on to India and Shu. Do you have any additional comments regarding what's been said, regarding the comments by Mr. Plaspark?
Yeah, thank you. Just two really brief comments. Number one, So as and when the transition happens in coal in India, the challenge we will face is that coal there is a very small organized sector. The number of direct jobs in coal mining plus coal plants is about 1.5 million approximately. But there's a huge unorganized informal sector which is estimated to be about 10 times that. So we have and that's largely unskilled. So while the people who are directly employed in coal mining or coal plants have some reasonable skill base who can be deployed, the unskilled informal sector, which is a huge, about 10 million plus minus, that will be a real challenge for the government. How do we make sure of safety nets for this population? And this is largely concentrated in a few states of India which are heavily coal mining dependent. And their economies are heavily dependent on coal mining as well. That's point number one. And point number two, while I feel that even though a formal transition from coal is yet some distance away in India because of the challenges I mentioned earlier, the planning for it should start now because it takes time to develop and implement plans. So the thinking in the government in consultation with the state governments and trade unions, that planning should be done quickly, and I believe there is lots of traction on that, so that we use the next decade to build up momentum, and the transition when it comes actually is much more smooth. Thank you.
Thank you for these two comments and for also keeping it short and sweet. Next up we have Victoria. What about Vietnam?
Thank you. So speaking about the energy transition in Vietnam in general, Vietnam really needs support. A crucial factor is the grid and the decentralization of energy supply, decentralization involving affected communities in the process. I think it's actually easier to involve certain communities on a local level than it is to involve CSOs on a national level. So if you're speaking about decentralization of the grid, involvement of local communities, and also speaking about Vietnam, just please don't forget Hang. Please don't forget the organizations that already had to shut down. Please don't forget the organizations that are on the verge of shutting down at the moment, and the ones who already moved to exile. For two more general remarks as well, it would be really, really great to have a bit of a more interlinked overview over all the JET initiatives that are going on. So the ICI JET project, then the JET-P, then we have now a Just Transition platform by the ABB, and there's a lot springing up, and it would be good to make sure that everyone knows what each other is doing to avoid overlaps, because a lot of these initiatives work with the same actors, because there's only a limited number of actors in Southeast Asia, especially in civil society. So having that a bit more streamlined, or at least, connected would be really helpful, also to save energy for the stakeholders who are involved on the ground. And finally, to remember that government actors have a discourse setting power as well. So the Just Transition movement that has been started by workers, organizations, by trade unionists is now, if other actors are taking over the Just Transition discourse, it's great to have more people supporting that, but also make sure that you're not changing the definition so far that it cannot really be recognized anymore. But thank you very much also for your remarks in the first round that were very meaningful.
Thanks a lot also for these more general remarks. I think that's very important to keep in mind when we talk about the Just Energy Transition Partnership, that it's really important that there's a justice element in that. So yeah. Last but not least, Niti, the most recent case of a JET-P. And I think we have to start screaming.
Yeah, I can do that. So the model we have for the innovative regions for the Just Energy Transition project, which is going to kick off anytime soon, I think is a good model for replication by the JET-P. So you have basically, in this model, you have a consortium funded by ICI, coordinated by GIZ with ILO, ITUC, CAN, Wuppertal Institute, working in lockstep with the federal government, with buying from the provincial government and local government. So I think that's a good model. So coming back to what I would like to see in the JET-P coming into Indonesia, one is that most of the money is in the form of grants, with most of the money actually reaching the ground, not getting stuck higher up. Number two, transparency every step of the way. How much money is coming in? What form does it take? Grants, concessional loans. Where does it go? So that needs to be very clear from the start, so we don't need to guess and, try and figure that out. Number three is when the government comes up with its investment plan, that it already has the buy-in of all the different stakeholders, which follows a stakeholder consultation. So that's a factor. And my last point is I really like to echo what Julia is saying about the need to map all the funding. Indonesia is getting a lot of funding. I mean, you've got JET-P, you've got ETZ, then you've got the multilateral banks, which are also very active in the space, giving out grants. Then you've got the bilaterals, government to government, the government of Indonesia, and eventually some of the time to do the same thing in the same place with the same people, and it's a sort of waste of very scarce resources. So I think that could be, if that could be streamlined, it could release even more money to be used in the country.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, I think we really have to start screaming. The chanting is very beautiful, but it's not very helpful when you're trying to have a conversation. Which is why I support the cause, and I'm much more happy that Lula is coming today. So, Mr. Flansburg, you have the final word, and also the challenge of trying to compete with the chanting metaphors. Please.
I try. That's the other side of free speech or free song. So just a few quick words. Number one is, should we delete the just? I'm completely against deleting the just. It is our requirement. We want to have it just. If we cannot achieve it in some cases or not achieve it brilliantly, it still doesn't mean that we give up on it. And specifically in the case of South Africa, I think there is a basis to do better, and we want to do better. And it's one part of what we are discussing here, that if we have, if we want to have it just and insist to have it just, it's also open for criticism. If we get up and say, no, it's just an energy transition partnership without being just, I mean, then the discussion, the public debate is over. And number two, I think we are better in liaising with other donors and other channels than it might appear. For example, with the ADB, with the ETM mechanism, we are in constant contact to our governor. It's part of what we. It's part of what we now agreed with Indonesia, so the ADB involvement is there. I think I leave it with that because I cannot get through. Okay.
All right. Seems like it's getting quieter now. We have about 5 minutes left in case there are any burning questions from the audience. Yeah, maybe you can share the microphone. Yeah.
Thank you. Hello.
Please, just a question. We have very little time. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. My name is Reza, a journalist from Indonesia. So we've been talking about our country, my country. So I have two questions here. The first one is the 2 billion in funding. It's a lot for us. It's like 15% of our national budget. So and it will come in form of loan, which adding more pressure to our national annual budget and more pressure in the future. So how you mitigate this all of this risk, especially with the country Indonesia, with history of debt? That's my first question. My second question will be, I think in the next couple months, the Indonesian government will work on the details, and as many people say, the devil lies on the details. So I want ask from the South Africa representative, what is your advice for Indonesian government to working on the detail, especially related to interest rate, grace period, and other things? It's very important, and thank you.
I think we can take two more very quick questions. Over here. Yeah. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Sangeet. I'm from DAV Berlin. My question is for Mr. Klasbal. I think the deleting the just is unacceptable, and we must have it, but maybe delinking it from the energy transition might be something that's very useful, because the timeline for determining what an energy transition requires and what is just in the host countries is, I think, very different because of the nature of consultation that's required to know what's just. So if you could maybe comment on the political timeline to put together these JETPs for the donors and the host countries, maybe delinking what it determines to be just, and the money for that, the financing for that needs to be different, right? So that's the question.
And there was a third question here.
Hi, Sarah from South Africa. So my question to this one is, I'm also a proponent of public decentralized energies of renewable energy and social renewable energy. I just wanted to know your thoughts on a mixed way in terms of how Costa Rica, for example, is run, where you have a mixture of rural partnerships around energy, where you have some private but mostly socially owned. Just to know your thoughts on that.
All right, and we have time for very quick answers. I think, Tamila, one of the questions was directed at you.
Thanks very much for the question. I think when it comes to the advice that I can give to Indonesia, firstly, is that to require the transparency to be there. That's going to be quite important to ensure that there's accountability from the government in how this investment is going to be, the planning of the investment, the planning of the implementation and the drawing down of the financing. I think also to note that it's not just an energy transition, it's a transition across the economy, and therefore everyone is a key player, and not the other value chains that are attached to energy and money. So I think meaningful engagement and collaboration is going to be very important to ensure that everyone is no one is left behind, and there's a voice of every constituency that's a role player in the transition. And I think when it comes to the private-public partnership, and that's quite the model that is most contested. I think a lot of people are not understanding the role of private, but also I think we need to understand the role of the state being very important, and that the state needs to be a key player. There should be some form of collaboration with other institutions and other organizations, especially cooperatives and communities, but the state is one of the most important key player, and that I think we should put our trust. I mean, it's a very difficult thing to say in South Africa, saying that we should put our trust in the governments, but the government should be the one that is the key implementer, and that would be how I respond to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamila and Mr. Plastat. I know you have to leave. You have a very busy schedule, so please, any reactions to the questions we received to the audience?
What? No. Sorry, yes, I have to jump out. But 2 points I want to make. One is on the share of grants and loans and other instruments. Again, it differs from country to country, and the one from Indonesia consists of grants, perhaps, highly concessional loans, and debt swaps. That's the three instruments. And I think that's fair enough. There are parts where you can do good things with loans, and the rating of Indonesia or India is very proper, so we can do something in these areas. In some other areas, you need grants, specifically when it comes to the just part. For example, vocational training, education, and all these things to allow the young generation to adapt to the requirements of a new energy or industry world. In these cases, loans don't make a lot of sense. Again, finally, to the just part, we insist to discuss on it about it. We will not allow partners to flip away from this debate. And just to explain finally what we believe is the just part, and that is the heading of the 2030 agenda, to leave no one behind. So through the transformation, we need to ensure that the workers, that the people, the employees do not lose their jobs, or if so, get other jobs, but more relevant in most of these transformations, to look at the kids of these families, to give them a perspective, not for jobs, for any kind of jobs, but for decent jobs. That is what we are fighting for. In democracies, I would say, either a transformation is just or it will not happen. If you look at non-democratic states, it might work for a while to work against the population, but not in the long term. That's our conviction. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Mr. Flexford, and thanks to all of you for joining our segment. I think we were able to raise a lot of important points. I'm also happy that you mentioned that really at the core of all this is the strengthening and understanding of a just transition that is inclusive and leaves no one behind. And of course, by extension, that is not only true for organized labor, but also for communities and civil society. So thank you so much. If you want, I mean, we still have some time afterwards, so please feel free to approach our speakers and ask your questions after the session is over. So thanks for joining and for bearing with us through the noise. Thank you.
I knew that you were sorry.
Like, oh my God.